All workers are created equally, but are some more equal than others? Well, this has been a huge issue for persons with disabilities trying to gain employment. I'm Kalila Reynolds, and it's time for another episode of Money Moves, JA, brought to you in partnership with EXIM Bank's Business Advisory Service, giving you the tools to grow your business. My guest today is head of the Jamaica Council of Persons with Disabilities, Dr. Hendricks, and she's going to be telling us what we should know in the workplace to facilitate persons with disabilities. Hi, Dr. Hendricks. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Kalila. It's my pleasure to be here.
So the Disabilities Act. So tell me, what are some of the things that the Act takes into account that employers need to pay attention to, be aware of?
Okay, so thank you for having me again, Kalila. The Disabilities Act, it covers the non-discrimination of persons with disabilities. And so employers, it is important that they not discriminate in their hiring practices, because the Act says that an employer should not discriminate against a person with a disability because of the disability. And so straight through the hiring process, from advertisement into the person coming into the organization as an employee, the training and the development that takes place within an organization, the person with the disability should have those opportunities just like any other person in the organization who does not have a disability. So those are some of the considerations. Of course, if it is that a person acquires a disability on the job, then the first option should not be to dismiss the employee.
All right, we're going to come to that shortly. That's another point, and a very good point as well. But when I'm hiring, you said there should be no discrimination. Of course, we understand that. But what if the type of disability that the person has, physically they're not able to perform the job? I mean, that wouldn't count as discrimination, would it, if the person physically
No,
can't
definitely
do it?
not, because the qualification of the individual should match what the job is asking for and the demands of the job. So it does not mean that a person is hired just because they have a disability. They should be hired to match the job functions that they're asked to do. So discrimination is if it is that they match the job description, they are able to function, but they're not hired because they have the disability.
Has this been a common problem?
It has been, but of course we know that discrimination, sometimes it's hard to prove, but we have had persons who believe that they have been discriminated against because they have gone through the interview process in terms of maybe a telephone interview or online interview, and then when they turn up and it is recognized that they have a disability, then the conversation becomes about the disability rather than about the capability of the individual. And of course there can be a conversation about the disability because some employers may not have been involved with persons with those types of disabilities before, so they would be curious to know how the person will function. But once we get over that, then it should not be a case where they are, oh my God, how do you manage? And speaking down to the individual and then beginning now to focus more on the disability rather than on the individual and the job that they're asked to be
So
working
what does the law say, if anything, about the physical workplace being accommodating to persons with disabilities? Are business places mandated to put in ramps and so on?
Access is one of the areas of the Disabilities Act, which is critical to persons with disabilities, and not only persons with disabilities, but because it is a Disabilities Act, yes, access is important. Access is not just ramps, for entry, and you would appreciate too that ramps benefit everybody. It benefits the elderly, it benefits young children, it benefits pregnant mothers, it benefits people with heavy load. And so ramps are once universally designed and properly designed by the standards, then they benefit the person with the disability, physical disability that is, of course, and others. And so, yes, places are expected to be accessible. That is one aspect. However, the doorways for wheelchairs, if persons get up to the ramp and there is a step into the building, then that will pose a barrier. And so it is expected that there be seamless movement as far as is possible and practicable, so that if a person with a wheelchair is being employed, then they are able to move without somebody having to lift them, which is impacting on the dignity of the individual and also impacting on the independence of the individual. And so ramps and rails, of course, wide doorways. When you get inside, it is the heights of the counters, the countertops should be multi-layered, so that persons who are sitting in a wheelchair can sit and deal with the customer service representative or whoever the other person is, or they can stand if, for those who can stand. So multi-layered, so persons can be dealt with generally. Bathrooms are another situation that needs to be taken into consideration for independence and dignity and, for the
if you have an employee who has that type of disability.
And you might have customers too. So you have to think of customers and you have to think of employees. So
if you don't have an employee, is it legally required for you to still have these various accessibility points?
The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and by extension the Disabilities Act, encourages, because you never know when someone will show up, and you never know either when someone in your organization may acquire a disability, because a disability is not something that is reserved for certain persons. Anybody can acquire a disability at any time. There are so many accidents that happen on a daily basis. There's work stress that causes persons to have stroke, and sometimes that leads to a physical disability. So the access, when the Disabilities Act encourages persons to ensure that their workspaces are accessible, yes, it is to facilitate the person with a physical disability, but it is also to enable you to have a space that is inclusive, so that anybody at any point in time can utilize your space without much difficulty. The other aspect of access is information access, because you have to think of persons who are deaf, who may be either your employee or your customer, and the importance of communicating with those individuals. And so that's another level of access. The other aspect of access to information is for persons with intellectual disabilities. Now, persons with intellectual disabilities is not somebody that you look at and can see that
what are these types of disabilities?
Intellectual disabilities are written on their faces.
What's an intellectual disability?
It's a person who does not function above a certain IQ, and that's 50% usually. So they function maybe at a grade 6 level or lower, and there are certain conversations, comprehension, social skills that they might not have, but they are excellent employees in areas that are skill related.
Physical tasks and so on.
Right, and they sometimes make excellent office attendants. Your office attendants are critical to your organization. They make excellent, sometimes anything that you have to do repetitively, they make excellent workers in those areas. And so those are the different areas of access. Of course, persons who are blind would need to ensure...
That's for an employer to even realize that a person has an intellectual disability. Because in our society, you just say, oh, this person fool, man.
Some persons will say that, and many times persons overlook that there is indeed an intellectual challenge that is allowing the individual to respond or not understand. If you have spoken to persons and maybe they have said to you time and time again, what you say again? Or tell me what you say. Even if you give them simple directions, it's an indication that there may be an intellectual disability. There are many persons like that.
Oh.
Because intellectual...
Learn something new today.
Intellectual disability, as I said, is not something that you see. And so, you know, those things have to be taken into consideration. So making materials, brochures, simple. If you notice quite a bit of items that are created or that are imported, manufactured, to put together, you will notice that there are a lot of pictures and less words these days. And it is because more and more manufacturers are making their items universally designed so anybody can pick up something and put it together. It doesn't mean that you have to have a high intellect to enable you to read something to put it together. That is because you know, as I said, manufacturers are seeking to help to create a more universally designed space, environment, world.
Right.
And phones these days are universally designed because there are access features that can be turned on for the different disability groups to enable them to utilize.
Voice command, very useful.
Indeed.
Voice to text
Yes.
and so on. So you were about to mention earlier about somebody who is visually impaired.
Right, persons who might be visually impaired or blind.
So who is the onus on to ensure that such a person, visually impaired or hearing impaired, is able to or has the resources to work properly? So if I'm visually impaired, I may need a special Braille keyboard. Is it the employer's responsibility to provide that, or should you have your own keyboard and bring it, for example?
Similar to how the employers provide for any other employee that comes into the organization. Because there is not necessarily, because all blind persons do not necessarily read Braille. And all deaf persons do not necessarily use sign language. So let us clear the air. Just like all tall persons do not require certain things, you know, so we do not want to stereotype persons who are blind or deaf that you must have Braille or you must have this. Persons who are blind can use a regular keyboard. They will tell you that there are special markers that we don't see that they are able to identify that marker and then know where all the other keys are.
The J and the K have that little groove on it.
Yes.
I took typing in high
Indeed,
school.
we do not know, but they
know where
know.
the keys are without looking.
Exactly, right. You know, so.
But it was just an example to say if there is something that
is required,
disabled person needs,
an assistive device.
Right. Is it the responsibility of the employer to provide it, or should the person, the
employer
have
would be required to provide same. If it is that there are challenges, there are resources available to support persons who would need specific assistive devices in the workplace. So there are assistive devices, grants provided by the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities.
And that's important to note, because some employers, when we've been talking about discrimination, may not want to hire a disabled person because of the facilities that they have to put in place. That they may need to buy something for this person and make an investment, and they're unwilling to do that. But if they know that there's a grant.
Right, there are grants, but also what employers need to understand is that not every person with a disability needs special devices. And so that should not be a means of barring persons with disabilities from being part of their establishment.
So it's just a communication.
A conversation can take place to ascertain how the individual will function in the space,
so how
and
should
what
that
is required.
go? Because you don't want to make assumptions, like you said.
So it can start from the beginning, the interview. So at the interview, as I said earlier, it's not that you're barring all questions related to the disability, but if it is that it relates to the work and how the person will function, that is a conversation that should be encouraged.
What types of questions should you ask?
It depends. how can you function, or how will you, or how can I facilitate you functioning in this space? Is there any special device that you need? The individual might say yes, and they might say no. If they say yes, is it something that you have already? Is it something that the organization will have to invest in? Is it something that the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities can assist you as an individual to have this as your personal device that you will utilize to function in the space? And if I, as an employer, deem you as a valuable employee, then making that investment is easy, or should be easy, because it's not usually very expensive. There are usually we think of persons who are blind who may need this various speech devices, or JAWS, the JAWS, job access with speech device that is utilized on the computer to enable them to maneuver it well. There are free versions. So as I said earlier, that manufacturers are facilitating and helping to create an environment where persons with disabilities are not necessarily at a disadvantage. And so it is just to have a conversation, or have a conversation with the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities as an employer. Okay, so I'm hiring, and in my slew of candidates, I have somebody who is deaf, or I have somebody who is blind, or I have somebody who uses a wheelchair, or I'm employing somebody who has autism. Whatever the situation is, what do you think? How can I go about this? What are the devices that might be needed? What's the investment I would need to make? So a conversation can be had at varying levels, to provide some guidance.
So tell me about the grant. How much is available?
Currently, up to $250,000 is available to assist the client to, purchase whatever assistive device they would require.
So it's available to the disabled person?
It is available to the person with a disability, yes.
So not to the employer?
Not necessarily to the employer, no.
Okay. So the disabled person can come to your organization, and that can be facilitated at the workplace if something they need at work.
If it is an assistive device, yes.
Right.
Once it is an assistive device, yes.
Wonderful.
We know too that it will take a while for, all of society, the implementation and all of society to fully understand and fully grasp. And that is the reason there will be codes of practice that are available to guide persons to see, how should I navigate this new environment that we're in.
And if people want more information, how can they contact the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities?
We do have a website, jcpdja.com, that is. You can call us too on 876-926-9374-5, or it goes up to 6, or 876-618-1133. Or you can email jcpd@mlss.gov.jm.
Thank you so much once again, Dr. Hendricks.
You are most welcome.
Now here's a recap of Dr. Hendricks' key points. Persons with disabilities should not be discriminated against when seeking employment. If a potential employee has a disability, start the conversation by asking what you can do in order to facilitate them at the workplace. There are grants available through the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities to make the workplace more accessible to persons with disabilities. And don't assume what an employee with a disability may or may not need. Simply ask. That's it for this episode of Money Moves JA, brought to you in partnership with EXIM Bank's Business Advisory Service, giving you the tools to grow your business. Visit their website at eximbankja.com and check out my website, KalilaReynolds.com, for a summary of this episode. I'm Kalila Reynolds. Until next time.